That's better. Right. Yeah. Hello, viewer. I recently watched the Convention Leaks video that is on Lloyd Evans's John Cedar channel, and very interesting, very interesting. But I'm coming at something that was brought in one of those videos in a completely different. He hasn't released this one yet, but basically at the end of the video, the one which is not on his YouTube channel but on sort of a Reddit or RedTube or whatever it is. Anyhow, there's a video there, and right at the end they refer yet again of having they refer to this bit of not being weak, and of being able to have strength, and to not cave in to opposition, because of course what's going to happen is, and they refer to this again, is when the governments turn on religion. Now, I've been away from this thing for 17, 18 years now, and that of course, what was this teaching? This teaching that the United Nations, that the wild beast would turn on the harlot, the world empire of false religion, and would devour her. And it was, the United Nations was supposed to be the final fulfillment of the great beast, and it turn on the world empire of false religion, and in so doing, of course would eventually start to then attack the witnesses, which would then, as soon as the witnesses got attacked, would then start God's involvement. Yeah. So anyway, that's what was taught them. That was what was taught them. And of course, I didn't know whether they still keep to this. I don't keep this. And that teaching, I used to struggle with that teaching in a lot of ways. But as you do when you're a Jehovah's Witness, you don't think logically. You may think you're thinking logically, you may think that everything is reasonably explained. So it all makes sense in this grand purpose of things. So you don't think you're being deluded, or you don't think you're uninformed, or you don't think you're uneducated. You think, as we know, that you have the truth, you have the explanation to everything, you know it, you just have it. Finger on the button. So you have the confidence when you go out to people's doors, that when anybody hits you with something, that you can come back and say, well, this is why. Now, this thing about the United Nations banning religion, a lot of the witnesses back then said, oh, it's in the UN Charter somewhere. It's in the UN Charter somewhere that they do have it inscribed somewhere, that at any point they can invoke, I don't know, Article 15B or whatever it is, and to ban religion worldwide. And of course, therefore, all the kingdom halls was closed down, and all the churches and the mosques and the temples and the synagogues, you name it, it doesn't exist anymore. So let's just think about this using common sense and a few figures which I've got prepared, so we can see how ridiculous this notion is. Okay. Now this is the UN. This is the UN we're talking about. Now I don't know if you remember, if you're old enough to remember, but there was a genocide in Rwanda in 1994. There was a genocide in Rwanda in 1994, and in 4 months, approximately 500,000 to 1 million people were butchered, and mostly by, bizarrely, machetes. Literally, the call went out and that was it. These people macheted. Guess who was in Rwanda at the time? Guess who was in Rwanda? Yes, the UN. The UN were in Rwanda at the time and allowed people who were safely in a church to be, to be massacred, people safely in a hotel to be led out, knowing that they were going to massacre. They couldn't do anything. They didn't do anything. They're hopeless, useless. Might have not been there at all. And people thought that the UN would protect them, would find out that the UN just disappeared, and so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. And so that's what happened. UN completely hopeless. The Balkan War in the 90s. The Balkan Wars in the 90s. Yet again, genocide again. And the figures there's around about 140,000 people died in the Balkan War in the 90s. Genocide, concentration camps. Guess who was there again? Yes, the The UN. The UN were there again. Could they stop genocide? Could they stop concentration camps? No. What did they do? Bugger all. They didn't do anything at all. So this is UN. This is the United Nations armed personnel, which is there's about 110,000 of them who are active personnel. I think like 90,000 are uniformed and 20,000 are clerks. Whatever it is. So 90,000 active, guys who wear the UN gear. So they couldn't stop genocide in Rwanda. They couldn't stop genocide in the Balkan War. Completely hopeless. Yet bizarrely, the Jehovah's Witnesses are saying that the UN and these guys, these 100,000 guys, are going to somehow stop religion being practiced worldwide. Okay, so let's see what these 100,000 people are going to try and accomplish. Well, let's just take one country. Let's take India. And I've only chosen India because it has a big population. We'll take just one country, has a big population, and it is quite, if you've been to India, they're quite religious, the Indians. They have a whole host of different faiths over there. They have Christianity, the Hindus, and of course the Muslims. Right, I'll give you a few figures so you can see how big the problem that the UN has got when it turns on the World Empire Council religion and decides to do something in India. Okay, so these 100,000 guys, right? They've got to somehow stop 96 million people in India, Hindus, who visit at least between 108 and 600,000 temples to worship. So it's 966 million Hindus who worship in between 108 and 600,000 Hindu temples, and there's probably more in India. That's what they've got to try and stop. These 100,000 guys. This is one country. They've got to, and this is based on a census in 2011. These figures are 7 years out of date. So I think that figure's probably gone up, knowing the way Indians are. I think these figures can be increased dramatically. Right, there are 172 million Indians who practice Islam. 172 million who practice Islam. Okay? In India, there's approximately 300,000 mosques. So you've got 600,000 Hindu temples, 300,000 mosques, and we haven't even talked about Christianity. There's approximately 28 million Christians in India who go and practice their religion in churches. So in other words, let's just say, for talking's sake, there's at least 1 million temples, mosques and churches in India. There's at least 1 million, and then you've got the figures of all the population who worship, millions and millions and millions. So how in God's name are these 100,000 guys going to stop? It doesn't even work out. Come on, it doesn't work out. You have 1 million temples, churches and mosques in India, where millions of people go to worship, and you have only 100,000 active personnel in the UN. It doesn't, even if they could get one bloke, they need 100, they need 1 million people to stand outside every temple, mosque or church with a gun saying, "You're not coming in today." And okay, let's just, let's just imagine, for instance, that the UN even has let's say there isn't 100,000. Let's have the full backing of America, because that's where the UN building is in America. Let's say the whole backing of America. Now, how has America got on recently when it had to go into likes of Afghanistan and Iraq How did America get on there, where, you know, all of a sudden there were people there who were quite religious, they're quite religious in these countries, have different versions of the Muslim faith. How did they go on? Did they just walk in and say, right, this is it, and not a problem? Or did they take a few casualties? Yes, we all know they took quite a few casualties. They couldn't stop the religious wars over there. As a result, it was seen better to leave and let them fight it out amongst themselves and stop losing any more American lives. Now, this is America, the most the biggest ornamented country in the world, and yet they couldn't stop these religious guys just turning up in a car full of explosive, or driving into the camps and blowing themselves up. Because yes, this is the incredible thing. Let's just say, let's think out the side of the Watchtower. Let's go into the realms of fantasy Watchtower time. Whereupon, let's consider that. Let's just think about India alone. Let's just go back to India because we've got the figures. So let's say that somehow they've managed to close down the UN using, I don't know how they've done this really, but they managed to close down every single temple, mosque and church in India. They've closed them down. So next thing, your average Indian is just walking up one day, he's walking up to go to the temple, the mosque or the church, and there's a big note on the door that says, "We have closed, sorry, the UN." And that's it. Let's just, this is what's happening here. They've closed the temples down. They've closed the mosques down, the churches. There's a sign here, "Sorry, we are closed, sorry, the UN." Now, let's just think about it. So your average person who's been religiously going to this building all of his life, maybe not just once a week, maybe several times a week, and maybe several times a day, all of a sudden we can imagine he's going to turn up, look at the door and go, "Oh well, well that's that then, isn't it? Right, okay, right, let's go." So he traipses back to his house with his family in tow. This is the place that his great-grandfather went with him, his grandfather, his father. He's been taking his son and his grandson. They've been going to the same temple or been part of this religion for, maybe 1,000 years, maybe longer. A rich cultural heritage that goes all the way back. The same can be said with Christians. You can trace it all, their form of worship all the way, they believe, back to Peter. So it goes back even further, 2,000 years. And we're to imagine that all of a sudden all these people are just going to accept that the UN have outlawed religion in India, and everywhere's closed, and as a result they've decided, well, that's it. Well, sorry, at the end of the day, is what the witnesses fail to realise, and which is why I struggle with this one, because if you can just go back in the history of man, just go back in the history, you don't have to even go that far, to be honest with you, and if you look in the history of man and say, what actually happens when a group of people, or even a person is told, by the way, you no longer can practice your form of worship. What usually happens? Does that mean they just go, "Oh, okay, fair dues, I've had enough, that's all right, no, didn't believe it anyway, it's not something so, okay, fair dues." Sorry, that hasn't happened, because as we know, if you can look at Europe especially, the amount of wars that they had that was based on one religion, one person being in power saying another that what their religion was right and the other religion was wrong and banning it, and those people never just dispersed and gave up. They fought and they fought and they fought. Europe is littered with religious wars. On somebody saying, "My God is better than your God." All of a sudden they're being trampled down. In Britain, for instance, during the Tudor period, there were successive kings from Henry VIII onwards, that went to his children, Mary, that went to his son Edward, then went to Elizabeth first, and then when James came over, you're going from the Church of England, you know, to a Catholic queen, and then going back to the Church of England, and then the Church of England again. And as a result, people who still wanted to practice their form of worship, instead of them just saying, right, fair dues, you know, all of a sudden you've changed this and that, they still wanted to practice their form of worship. They never gave up in their belief, and as a result, they did so on the pain of death. And many of them were burnt at the stake. Many of them were hung, drawn and quartered because they still wanted to practice their form of religion. In other words, it's quite simple. If you suppress a religion, it doesn't go away. It imbues people to actually fight back and do something. It makes them more religious than they were before, because obviously they're thinking, hold on a second, who has the right to say that I can't worship in this place in the way I want to anymore? And that's what happens. It happens today. There's people probably right now, as we're speaking, are killing a group of other people because they're saying, you know, they're a minority religion and they feel suppressed and they're fighting back, or they're in the majority and they want to suppress the minority. And it's going on all the time. Suppressing religion, it doesn't go away. People don't stop believing that religions, worshipping their God and their want, and more importantly that, they are willing to fight. They're willing to fight for their right to worship their God in the way they want to. And they will gladly give their lives. This is why these people have no problem getting into a truck and driving through this compound and going boom and blowing everybody else up to smithereens, including themselves, because they are firm believers that, you know, they're going to get some sort of reward. And yet, bizarrely, we're to think, and this is the arrogance of Jehovah's Witnesses, that they believe that somehow when the UN pull off this major stunt of not just closing down every temple and church and mosque in India, but they somehow managed to do this the whole world around. I don't even want to think about how many millions of places of worship and millions of followers this would affect. But they're the only ones who are going to be, after this great purge has happened, and everything's been closed down, that they're the only ones who still want to practice their form of worship. The arrogance of that is ridiculous. To think that these people who have been part of a faith which is clearly stretches back further than either Jehovah's Witness movement or the Christian movement. You know, what about the Jewish faith, for instance? It goes back thousands of years. They closed down all the Jewish synagogues. Are they going to all of a sudden, you know, just say, oh, well, that's that then? Come on. And yet the witnesses believe they're the only ones. They're the only ones who still will have a faith. And then as soon as, you know, they start getting touched, you know, they will have to go underground. It is complete nonsense, because most of the personnel who will be, you know, doing this will have a faith themselves. You know, are we going to always find out that, you know, that all the people who are closing down these churches are atheists? I don't think so. If you look at India, if you try to get one person out of India to close down all the temples, they would have a faith themselves. It is just utter rubbish. And yet still, the witnesses believe it. Still, Jehovah's Witnesses still believe that, yes, the UN is going to pass this charter to close down every mosque and synagogue and temple and church. You name it, they're gone. And somehow they're going to have two blokes standing there, barring the way, saying, no, you can't come in. Two blokes, there wouldn't be more than two blokes. If they started, imagine if all of a sudden they said to, you know, the Wailing Wall, oh, by the way, guys, you can't come down here and do prayers anymore. Can you imagine what would happen in Jerusalem? Can you imagine what if they started close down Mecca? Can you imagine what would happen? The soldiers around Mecca saying, no, you're not walking around here anymore. Can you honestly imagine what it would take? You know, the revolt would be unbelievable. Literally anybody there they'd be killed in seconds. Then send some more troops in, killed in seconds. It wouldn't happen. Jehovah's Witnesses have this arrogance that they're the only people who have the true religion, have the true faith. Kid you not, there's people out there who are willing to die for the belief in their religion, when Jehovah's Witnesses sometimes struggle to even maybe go out and chap a door because it's a little bit cold. So that's it. Honestly, I struggle with this. I struggle how the witnesses still teach this, because it is, when you logically think about it, completely and utterly impossible. And yet it's an integral part, as shown at the end of this video, that they still believe that the political system of things are going to turn on religion. It can't happen. Unless you're going to get a group of people from a completely different planet who are atheists, this can't happen. And yet the witnesses believe it will happen. It is staggering. And yet, bizarrely, I used to believe that. I never questioned it. And it just shows sometimes how easily you can be controlled and deluded into thinking things, when if you actually sat back and took yourselves out of it and thought about it for literally half a minute, you'd say, but that doesn't make any sense. And the more and more I look at what I used to believe, the more and more I say, you know what, it didn't make any sense. Yet to me at the time, it made perfect sense. Wow, what does that show? How gullible that I was, and how gullible humans are in general, that sometimes we can swallow things which just don't make any sense. Yes, they made perfect sense. Oh, I figured that one out. Anyway, I just thought I'd leave that one with you, and oh dear. Oh, where do we go from here? Alright, see you later, bye bye.